Welcome to React Roundup, the podcast where we keep you updated on all things React related. This show is sponsored by Raygun and produced by Top End Devs and Unvoid. Top End Devs is where we create top end devs who get top end pay and recognition while working on interesting problems and making meaningful community contributions. And Unvoid provides remote design and software development services on the most client-friendly business model. Clients only pay after the tasks are delivered and approved. In today's episode, we will talk a lot about Next.js, and we will also talk about some career advice for people wanting to start or already starting but getting the hang of software development later in their careers. My name is Lucas Paganini. I'm your host in the podcast. Joining me in today's episode is also the hosts Chris Fruin.
Hello, everybody.
Peter Osa.
Hi, everyone.
And our very special guest that I just spent the last 10 minutes figuring out how to correctly pronounce his full name, Paul Bratslavsky. He is a software engineer at Strapi, and he is also a content creator. He creates content for people that are trying to switch into their careers to web development later in life. And he is also a co-host at the Not Newell podcast. And he's also done a course on Next.js. So Paul, thank you so much for being here with us.
No, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to chat about all the cool things that we have planned today. So thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. So before we get started, let's just go through some quick definitions. So I said that you are working at Strapi, and that is relevant to the course that you publish on Next.js because it was also published in the YouTube's channel of Strapi, which, by the way, that's a huge note for everyone listening to this. You can just go to YouTube and watch the course. Like it's all there. And I think we could start by defining what is Strapi and also what is the value proposition, the premise of your course on Next.js, because there's already so much content out there about Next.js. So why should people go through the course that you did?
Yeah, no, definitely. So Strapi is a headless CMS. It's all JavaScript-based, which is awesome. So if you're doing front-end with Next, which is also JavaScript, makes things easier. You stay in one language. And the biggest thing for Strapi is if you're going to have a lot of content and you need non-technical people to manage it, Strapi allows you to do that out of the box. There's other features as well, but mainly for content management for non-developers. But you as a developer, you do have access to that data via the API. So you could do full CRUD functionality, create authorization, authentication. You could, and because it's Strapi is highly customizable, like if you need to add new features to Strapi, you could actually create your own plugin. And what's awesome, because it's all based on Node.js, if you need to add additional like controllers, services, middleware, some functions, you're able to do that, but you don't need to. You could actually get started right out of the box. It takes 2 minutes to set up, and you have a working API where a non-developer could manage data. And what I like about that as a developer, like I used to work on like smaller websites when I was starting out where a lot of stuff is hard coded. And then you'll get a call like, hey, can you go and change this data in my website for me? I'm like, I don't want to do this as a developer. It's like, I mean, I don't mind it, but like, and so to me, this idea of having a place for non-technical users to manage their own content themselves, and for me as a developer, not have to worry, that's amazing. And the biggest thing for me is I switched careers into development late in life, and I always like thought of software engineering is you have a business that has a problem or they want to create a product. And so to me, I always thought about what is the fastest way to get to the product. Like I don't want to spend months or years in development. I'm not saying there's anything wrong, but I always thought of like, how could I help this business to solve the problem? And so for me, like leveraging Next.js, leveraging a headless CMS like Strapi, I feel like you save 10,000 hours of development. And it's like an easy way to get started. So like when I first got my first dev job, I worked at a company where I learned a lot of things that are not to do. And what I saw a company that tried to do everything in-house, you know, their own backend, their own like design system, and the team was only like 5 people, and they spent years of building this product, and they never delivered it to clients. And I was actually wondering, like, how is this company even like generating income? And so to me, I really like things that help you build things quickly to get them out to the clients as fast as possible.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So this seems like a very unique CMS, because when I think of CMS, I just think of something where I can host blog posts and update the content from there. But that sounds way more flexible and honestly just modern. I was going through the website as well, and just by you saying that it's fully customizable and done in Node, that just made it sound very interesting. So I would definitely check it out on any project that is requiring a CMS. There's some very interesting products that were arising around the CMS space a few months ago. And currently, it feels like maybe it's just myself and the bubble that I'm in, but I haven't received any hot topics about just companies launching new CMSs and stuff like that. But I remember that like a few months ago, there were a lot of interesting CMSs popping up. I also thought it was really interesting that Strapi has not just a REST API, but also a GraphQL API. So that definitely makes it very interesting for people that are looking to work with those two different API data formats. So yeah, pretty cool. Now, specifically about Next.js, what's the connection between Strapi and Next.js, or is there none? It's just like Strapi is a headless CMS and you could be using anything, and you just happen to want to create content about Next.
So very good, like interesting and good question, by the way. Next, I'll be honest with you, I didn't use Next.js like up to 12. I tried a few times. I was like, you know what, there's like other things that I can just, use that are nice to me. But when I saw the differences they made, like Next 13, Next 14, and where Next.js was going, to me, that was amazing. Like from, the introduction of like React Server Component, like, the new app router, like you could create route handlers or you could create actions. Like to me, that just opened up this whole way of building things quickly. And that's the part that I like. And, when I was thinking of like a course to build, and after exploring Next.js, and it started from the standpoint, like I kind of like it. And now I'm like, God damn it, they got me. And it's like really, really good. And so for me, it's, again, how could I build something quickly with the tools that are available? And through their app router, like, folder allows you to easily, structure your routes. You could do nested routing, like easy. The fact that now you could use React Server Components to load your data specifically to that component, and then wherever you move that component, because that data loading is inside that component, it's still going to work. And to me, there's a lot less things that I had to think about it. And to be honest, when I was starting out, like as a newer developer exploring all the like 13 and 14 features, I was like, oh, this is stupid, like I don't understand it. But once you understand like the tools that they give you, you realize that they really thought, like, Vercel team and Next.js, like they really thought about what they want to accomplish and where they're going. And I find myself like really enjoying the developer experience process. And also they're growing in popularity. That means that, they're huge. That means that other people enjoy working with Next.js. And, and so I was like, you know what? This is something that I want to learn more about because I'm not an expert. I think this will be a good opportunity to do something that other people are really enjoying. And I want to see like what a cool like way that we could combine it with a headless CMS. And what's interesting, like a lot of times when people think about headless CMS, they think of like it's a blog post or I'm managing content, which is perfectly fine. But the path that I took for this particular project, we used the, Strapi to power like an app, because it's not just like a blog platform. So the functionality that you have your landing page, of course, you could go and see, but once you log in, you have the ability to generate summaries of YouTube videos. So you put a link of a YouTube video, you hit generate, it's going to generate your summary, and you have like basic authentication. So if you're authenticated into your account, you're only going to see your videos, you're not going to see somebody else's videos. So we implemented, the full CRUD functionality, including like, uploading images and files and stuff like that. And so to me, I kind of did like, if someone were to build an app, like what features do they need? And I was like, really happy that Strapi, it allows you to do that. It doesn't get into your way. And one of the things that, so I love Next.js. I like other frameworks as well. Like Remix, I basically like anything that my customer or boss will tell me to use, I'll use it. So that's like how I judge things. But with Next.js, what I saw a lot of people do is that they're like, we need to start a project. Let's use Drizzle or Prisma. Let's manage our own database. Let's do all this stuff. And I'm like, I know it's great and it's cool and I love it. But what if one day, you need to push that content somewhere else, maybe on iPhone, maybe your refrigerator has a screen and it needs to showcase some content. And so I realized building everything, and it's not a bad approach, but building everything just in Next.js as your full stack framework, you can do it. It's amazing. But what I like is I like decoupling my content delivery platform from the front end. And so when I work with Next.js, and I just recently realized there's a term for it, it's called backend for your front end. Basically, even though Next.js is your full stack framework, you're still using it as a way to present your data, but your API lives somewhere else. In our case, like Strapi. And for me, I love the flexibility that now I could have my Next.js project that's consuming my Strapi data, but if I want to have another source, like an iPhone that has a different app, but similar to the content that we need, we could hit that same Strapi endpoint with that mobile app. Or if, again, I want to push content, like a very ludicrous example, refrigerator, you can do it. And so working at Strapi, I've seen so many different use cases that people are using with Strapi outside of a standard blog. It blew my mind. And so I wanted to create something that kind of goes slightly beyond that.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, I think that we as developers, we jump too quickly to something that we're going to have full control on. And honestly, it actually makes sense in many cases if you're actually building a web application, but not always, and you also have to consider how much time you're going to add because you want to manage the database completely yourself, right? So you could still just start with Strapi or something similar, and then you can switch later when you actually need it. By the way, how does that look like? What if someone wants to start with Strapi, for example, and then later on they're getting enough traffic that they actually want to have more control over their backend and make sure that it scales the way that they want it to scale? How would a migration of data out of Strapi look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'll answer it in two parts. The first part, we do have most of our clients, they're and I can't mention them, but they're enterprise level clients that are getting a lot of hits, and it scales well. Because the cool part about Strapi, you could self-host it, so it's literally up to your DevOps team how they decide to manage that process, which makes it awesome. We do also have a cloud solution, but in terms of the migration process, if there's many ways of doing it. You could export your data into a format that makes sense for you, because it's an API driven thing. Some people, if let's say you're not well versed in database backup and that whole managing SQL databases and stuff like that, where you could actually just do a data migration from if you use Postgres, you could take that Postgres and migrate it to wherever you need to. Or if you're not well versed in that part of things, because we have an API that you could hit, you could literally just write a script that will hit the API of Strapi, pull that data from there, and then you migrate it to whatever platform that you want. We do things like that in the opposite way. If someone, for instance, want to migrate from WordPress, they'll take their data, they'll clean it up, and then they'll just iterate through the data, and they'll just make an API call into Strapi, and Strapi will just load that data. So there's many ways of doing it. Another thing I was going to say, a lot of times when I talk about Strapi, people think it's Strapi or nothing. And so a lot of use cases that I've seen is Strapi is just one service that their application uses. And that's kind of one thing I did on a very small scale, for the Next.js project. Although I'm using Strapi to handle certain things, we do have a small AI portion of it where we use OpenAI and a library called LangChain, which is awesome that they have a TypeScript version, because a lot of the Python things are, I mean, a lot of like AI stuff is done with Python, which is another language to learn for folks. So it was kind of cool. And so what I did is like, I'm like, here's a piece that Strapi handles, and here's a piece that Next.js handles with LangChain. And what I like about it is could be a piece of a big puzzle. And there's like public companies like PostHug that use Strapi. They have a whole website, and their content, just because they had the system that they had before, all of their content is in Git. And they're like, we're not going to move it to a different thing because we're fine with Git. We like it. And so they use Strapi just to manage the users and their profiles. And so it doesn't have to be like, you have to do everything. It could be like a piece of the puzzle in your application. And what I tell people, like, not every solution is right for you, and not every solution is perfect. And you just have to find, like, do your due diligence, research what's out there, and figure out what is the best solution for your client. And that's kind of, to me, like, even though I will look at Strapi, I don't think Strapi is the right fit for everybody. But that's for you to decide based on your customer's needs.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a very balanced response, and it makes a ton of sense. Interesting to know that it scales so well. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. All right, so well, there's still a lot of subject for us to cover. We didn't even went into some of your career advice for people wanting to switch to software development on their after 30s, right? But before that, just want to make sure, Chris, Peter, do you guys have any questions thus far?
Okay, yeah, I do have one. So I've actually used Strapi for a very long time, and it's actually pretty awesome. Right, I think I wrote an article on it once before when I worked on it. Yeah, so but then I wanted to ask, or maybe you could talk more about the Strapi Cloud feature. I think they just provided a cloud feature for Strapi. Yeah, that's for users that maybe you don't want to handle your deployment or your cloud aspect, right? Like I know that you can self-host Strapi, like, but yeah, for people that are not really technical, they would rather just try to hand it over to someone who can. So maybe you could talk deep on that, right? Maybe to just speak on how Strapi Cloud works. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. Because again, like, I'm definitely not going to be a DevOps person, and if I have to struggle with that stuff, like, to me, that's just time that I could be using somewhere else. And because like Strapi self-hosted, a lot of people like, oh, perfect, I want to do all this cool stuff. I want to spin up like a Docker, or I want to use Kubernetes, or I want to use AWS. I want to do like, and I'm like, I just don't want to hear you talk about this stuff, because to me, that's stuff that is hard for me, and I just don't want to worry about it, because I just want to work on creating the business solution for the product that the business wants. And so now we recently started Strapi Cloud. And to be honest, we did get some flack about it, because, you look at platforms like Heroku before they took away their free tier, and you look at other, services, they all start with a free tier. And at Strapi, we are, open source company, and we give so much. Our Strapi Community Edition is absolutely free. You can do whatever you want. We have, like, when people buy the enterprise license, they're literally just paying for the support. So we don't, like, as a company, we want to be profitable. So we made the decision, we're going to start with Strapi at the higher tier, focusing more on our enterprise users or like agencies who could afford. So our initial pricing was $99 a month. But even with that, like, when you take a look what it does, you get a database, you get email, you get CDN, you get file storage. Everything is deployed in one quick step, very easy to manage. And for me, like, I thought about it. If I'm a DevOps person, like, the more work I have, the better. But as someone who's looking to build a product, they're like, I just want to get a solution that I could pay. So for a developer who's building everything themselves, they're like, I don't want to pay $99. Why would I? Like, I just build it myself. Perfect. That's great. For a business owner who's like, I just want to have this thing done, they're like, $99 a month, that's nothing. And I kind of found it very interesting how, like, depending who you talk about, it's either highly overpriced or highly undervalued. But with that being said, with all the things that we're doing, because, Strapi Cloud is the easiest way to deploy, your Strapi application, similar to like Vercel for Next. It's the best way to do it. And so we're started at the higher price range. Now, a couple of months ago, we introduced our dev plan, which is at $29 a month as we continue to make progress with the cloud. And our next iteration is we do want to have that free, hobby plan that developers could just use for our cloud. But we just took that top-down approach by let us try to make some income first so we could continue to develop these services. And so our goal is to have a free tier of Strapi Cloud. And to me, it is the best way and the easiest way to deploy Strapi without worrying and having to do things like yourself.
Yeah, that's awesome. Actually, I think it's actually a very good idea for people who don't want to get their hands dirty with DevOps stuff. Like you just want to avoid that. Yeah. So I think it's really actually great, and I think it's overvalued, as you said, because depends on the individual. Yeah, if you're the dev and you have an experience with that, you'll be like, oh yeah, why will I pay this to just deploy my stuff to my server? Like, why? Why will I do all this? Right. So yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I also had a question. I think you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, you have some experience with Remix as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I actually I love Remix. I'm not gonna deny it. A lot of people say I'm like you like a framework fanboy. I'm like, I love Astra, I love Remix, I love Next.js, I love all the things that allow me to build cool things. Like I'm not I'm not on team A or team B. And for me, like Remix was an interesting point because when they came out, they led with features that made development like super awesome. The unfortunate part, and Remix is going to catch up for sure. I'm not even worried about it. So I'm glad like that they were picked up by Shopify. But access to React Server components, the only way you were able to do it was through Next. So if you wanted to get all those latest features, that's kind of where you had to go. And everybody's catching up and what have you. But Remix to me, like if I had to describe Next.js and Remix, and I know I'm going to get some flack for it, Next.js hides a lot of implementation stuff and makes it easy for you to build things. Remix, it doesn't hide as much, and you are forced to explore like native web APIs. And so when I say this, and again, I'm going to get flagged, like when you do Next.js, you're going to become a really good Next.js developer. When you do Remix, you're going to just become better at web in general, just because you have to rely on using more of the native like web APIs. It's not hidden from you. And you like if you need something, you kind of have to like find it yourself and learn about it. And I like that part about it. And the other part I liked about, and Next.js is like pretty good with this now, but in Remix, one of the reasons why I loved it is it simplified and I know this is a stream about Next.js, so I'm sorry. But the Remix, the part that I loved about it is their concept of loaders and actions. And basically, if you need to get data from anywhere, you use a loader. If you want to, mutate data, you use an action, and it just sits at the top of your file. And to me, that kind of compartmentalized behavior of my app in a way that made sense. So it's like very easy. And one magical thing they do, and I have no idea how they do it. Prior to like, let's say you're using just like React in Next.js, they have that revalidate like functionality you call. But prior, like in React, if you have like many items, like let's say you have a nav on the left, you have a nav on top, there's an avatar image, you're also using it somewhere else, and you have to manage that state somewhere. So if you change it in one place, it'll get changed in that like if you change it in the side nav bar, it should propagate throughout your whole app. And a lot of times like you either had to use context, or people used to use Redux like to manage that. In Remix, that just was handled magically. So if your data changes, it would reload that data everywhere that it's needed, and you don't have to think about state that way, like the old traditional way. So, your source of truth was your database. Like if the data changes, it will just automatically update your UI. And I thought it was wonderful. And then Next.js 13 came out and 14 came out, and they kind of went the similar path. And now in Next.js, like, at least in 14, if you want to revalidate certain route because data changed somewhere else, you just hit that revalidate function and you tell what route, or you could even do it by tag, and it will revalidate that data. And so for me, that's kind of like the thing that I like with Remix. And to be honest, like for me, like I'm not like a framework fanboy, so I have my personal website that I'm working on, nothing to talk about, but it's using Remix just because I want to use Remix. Like a lot of the course that I made for Next.js, I think that's awesome. And then if I want to write HTML and vanilla like JavaScript with CSS, I'll just use Astro because it's just like a nicer way to start a project. And so for me, like, I think you have to understand what you're trying to accomplish at your work, and then you have to pick the tool accordingly. I haven't been in this industry forever, but I have like friends who've been here for a while, and one of the like folks that have been around for a bit, this is like the thing that I hear from them when they talk to like an excited developer, like mid-level or like, junior, they always start leading with a framework. Oh, we should build this product with this. We should do this. And then my friend who's been here for a while, he's like, but what are you actually trying to accomplish? Like, what is the end goal? Like you work backwards. So you first realize like what you're trying to do, and then you don't make your solution fit the framework. You have the solution that you think of, and then you have to do your due diligence to figure out like what is the best choice. And like this is where a lot of sometimes people like give WordPress a hard time or Squarespace. I'm like, sometimes that's the best solution, and you just have to be okay with it. And that's kind of like where I stand. But I recommend folks like try Remix, although if you're on Twitter, you realize that there is not going to be Remix 3. They basically going to put all that functionality into React Router 7. So if you, when that comes out, so when you start React app with Vite, and you could right now, because React Router 7 is not out, you could select the Remix option. But I guess what the Remix team is going to do, because they realize Remix is very similar to React Router like 6, and they're like rewriting code in 2 different places. So I guess moving forward, until whatever, nobody knows what the future is, all the functionality that Remix has will be in React Router 7. So if you want to take advantage of all those cool things that I mentioned, when React Router 7 comes out, you'll just have a React Vite project, and you just install React Router 7, and you'll have all those features. And I kind of like that approach because, again, you're doing things in a thing that it's more familiar for you. So like if you need Next for something else, you use Next. Sometimes you like Next, like a full stack framework comes with certain things that some developers, they'll be like, I don't need all those things. And so you'll be able to start with React with Vite and then add the features that you need. And if you want the similarities, what Remix has to offer now, that's what React Router 7 is going to have.
Okay. Wow. Okay. That was a awesome answer. Yeah, the reason I ask is because I'm yet from another framework. I typically use Gatsby, but I kept hearing about more and more about Next.js, and so I'm starting a new SaaS project. And I said, yeah, okay, I take a look at this Next.js thing. But then just a few days ago, or sometime this week, someone made a post about how Next.js, especially like the newest version, is super confusing. And so then I was nervous. I was like, okay, should I just do Remix or whatever? But I guess even within Next.js, you have opinionated people. A lot of people say they love the earlier versions. They said, yeah, I could build stuff super quick, and now they're doing a lot of like opinionated decisions. But yeah, it's people who I guess enjoy opinionated systems versus non-opinionated systems. But in your opinion, you seem to really enjoy the steps they've made in the past versions, in the most recent versions in Next.
Yeah, the change that they made, I enjoy. But one thing that I'm going to like come back, because I do want to add this as a caveat, it like to what you said, it's like very opinionated framework. And I think if you're okay with that, Next.js is perfect for you. So like for me, like there's a reason why my personal site is built with Remix, is because I don't want to be opinionated. I just want to explore different things in my project, and I want to have access to certain things. And there's a reason why, like for, course, or let's say like a project you're going to work with other teammates, if you have developers who are familiar with Next and that's all your team, it's like that makes sense. And so again, I come back to that point of like, you have to do your due diligence. But yeah, like I love Next.js, but I do it in the context of like, with a specific goal in mind. Like, so I wouldn't just say use Next.js for everything.
Awesome. Okay. Now let's get a bit onto your career advice. we are already at 30 minutes of podcast, so I'll try not to take too much time. But you have very in-depth content, so we can also just take it from an introductory kind of point of view, and then if people want to know more about it, they can just go look for your more in-depth content, right? But in general, what do you see are the main pain points and also the main ways to deal with those pain points for people wanting to switch careers to tech later?
Wow, that's like such a big topic for me. I think depending where you are, you're going to have a different pain point, but I'm going to talk from the standpoint of new people trying to go into the industry and this, content on Twitter, YouTube, which is like, Devin's going to take your job. AI is taking over everything. The world is over. There's no need for engineers, like you don't need to be a software engineer. Like you can't get a job, and it just scares people away. And a lot of times people say, well, who listens to that? And I'll tell you a story. When I was like learning to code, is something I shared like before the podcast. I used to teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial arts, and due to industry, I was like, I need to find a better career choice. And I always like coding. I always like tinkering because like my business website wasn't WordPress. And then I was like, I got to tweak a few things. So that led me learning a little bit of PHP. And then I was like, I love this stuff. This is cool. And then at like age 30, I was like, let me try to kind of explore this learning to code a little bit more. And I went on Stack Overflow and I asked questions, is it too late for me to learn to code at 30? And being naive 30-year-old, like believing what people say, like I had some positive comments, but the ones that stood out for me were the negatives. Basically told me like, you never going to happen, like forget it. You're too old, whatever, never, like it's just not. And I actually believed it. And it discouraged me from jumping into this journey of learning to code until I was like 35. And then I had to work so hard because actually learning to code is not as easy. Don't believe the hype that in 30 days you're going to get a big job. It took me like 3.5 years from starting to learn to code to like landing my first junior developer job as a React developer. And I was required to start learning C# because their API was in the ASP.NET. So it was like a long journey. But what upset me, and that part of it was on me because I believed somebody else, is that it was what they said that it's too late. It was true. And so I spent 4 or 5 years not doing anything about like the dream that I had. And I was like so frustrated. And so now when people, talk about AI taking jobs, it's like, if you want to be a developer, this is something you want to do, I would say just do it, and go for it. Don't listen to the hype, do the work. And I'll just tell this anecdotal story. I started a community a long time ago on Slack just to share my progress. And I had other people basically doing similar things as I was. And we had a guy who kept asking questions like, hey, I'm trying to build this thing. And I'm like, can you show me your code? And he's like, I didn't start yet. And then I had this girl, Katya. She started like building projects. She was a paralegal at the time. And 2.5 years into it, she sends me a message out of the blue. She's like, I got my job. I'm like, wow, that's like super awesome. And so the difference is like someone who just listened to the hype, came up with excuses, versus someone who like, I'm just going to do the work that it takes. And however long it takes, that's what it takes. And she got hired. And so my first advice is, just go for it.
I also think that people underestimate or overestimate. I think I got confused at myself if it's whatever. So companies have a really tough time trying to find good talent. That's what I was going to get into. And I think people have this weird image in their minds that, because there were so many layouts on Google and Meta and Amazon, the market is flooded with those seniors and there's no room for juniors and planes. There is room. There's a lot of room. Companies are still hiring, and the companies that are hiring are having a very hard time finding the right talent. It is still hard for companies to find the right talent. And that already tells you that there is space for it, and there is a need for it. Maybe for juniors, it's more complex because the situation that I'm painting here is more towards more senior and playing levels, which can be scary for someone that is just starting out. I get that. And honestly, I think you have more knowledge about this marketplace than me, Paul. It's been a very long time since I don't have contact with how hard it is to get a job as a junior developer, especially late in their careers, because we know that there's a lot of prejudgment from hiring managers and tech companies. So all of that is a reality, and although this should not happen, we need to face the reality as it is and deal with the problems. So I think you can speak more about that. But I would say there is definitely room for talent. It's just that software development has a steep learning curve. That's it. It doesn't matter which level you're talking about. You can, even for an entry level, there is a steep learning curve. It's not something that you learn on a weekend and you start being productive on it. It takes a lot of time. So if you want to get into software development, you gotta be willing to go through that. There's just no way to work around it. You just gotta go through it.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add to it, it is very difficult. And when you're switching careers, like regardless of what you did in the past, like for instance, I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like if you don't have like a social presence, so you don't network, when you send your resume blindly, like number one, it might not pass through all the keyword readers just because you might not have all the requirements necessary. And number two, like nobody knows who you are. And so there is no, like, it's very hard to sell yourself. So if you're serious about switching careers, you need to start doing things publicly. That's why the build in public is a thing. It's like you need to share what you're learning, write blog posts, and don't, like, when you write blog posts, it's not like, let me tell the world like how awesome I am. I literally create content to reiterate to my brain what I've learned, because by teaching it, I reinforce it. And sometimes I catch myself with so many mistakes. And I made a video a long time ago, which I thought was very funny because I think people missed the point, but it was, and maybe I missed the point, but it's called React versus JavaScript. And it's got a lot of, like, almost like 40,000 views on my YouTube channel, a lot of positives, but then there's like negative comments like, bro, you don't know JS. What are you talking about? This is like this broke my brain. And basically what I did in that example, instead of like writing, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and using JavaScript appropriately in your HTML, or like targeting your HTML elements, I actually wrote everything with JavaScript, and my JavaScript created like the HTML similar to what like JSX is. They're like, people are like, why would you do that? And I was like, exactly, why would I do that? Like, I wouldn't, but I did it because I wanted to learn how this is done. And so for me, like, I didn't care about the critique. So basically what I want to say, you need to do things publicly so people know that you're on the path of becoming developers. So when I was starting out, I used to tell everybody, hey, this is what I'm doing. I started a YouTube channel to share the things that I'm learning. I started like posting more and more. Now I post even more, like blogs and stuff like that, content out there, because when people search your name, like if you search Paul Bratslavsky, you're going to find, like, you're not going to be confused that I'm like a developer. Like, you'll find a talk that I did. You're going to find, a bunch of other stuff I did. If you go to my GitHub, it's pretty active, even though a lot of those projects are trashed. I'm not gonna lie to you, because that's how you learn. You build a lot of throwaway projects. You need to get out there. And so to summarize this, start your learning journey, start hanging out with developers. And this is gonna sound like it's a lot. Go to meetups, go to Discord, talk to other people. And meetups is the best way because you're meeting people like in person, you build relationships. And there's many times I went to meetups where like you literally, I hear other people talk, and I actually talked about this, where it's like, hey, my company's hiring, like, are you interested? And so it's a good way to build connections. And the reason why this is important, I have a friend, she switched careers recently, and she applied to 700 resumes, like, she sent out. She got 5 callbacks, 1 job offer, which is insane, because sending out cold resumes is insane. I'm going to tell you this because this is the truth. I don't want people to be like, misconstrued it. I've never sent many resumes, because when I used to have my own business, I was all about like word of mouth, referral, and sales. That's how I got clients to my jiu-jitsu school. And so I approached getting hired the same way, where I had friends who are developers. I'm like, hey, this is your company hiring? Oh, they're not? like, can you look at my resume? Does it make sense? What should I do to, or what tech should I improve on to have like getting like better chance of getting hired? And like, I have those conversations, and my friend was like, well, first of all, you need to move to Texas, because if you want more opportunity, Austin is the place to be. This is pre-COVID. Second, he's like, you're trying to learn way too many things. Like, you need to focus on React. And that's what I did. And so like, you kind of need to have developers around you that you could talk to. You have to live the life basically, even before you get into the field. And what ended up happening through those conversations and through having these networks, all my jobs have been my resume with a referral. It's never been just my resume alone. So I could quickly go through my history just to hit this point home, and this would be the last thing we could talk about it. So I used to teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Before that, I had no developer jobs. I was learning how to build like custom PHP and WordPress sites. And in my Jiu-Jitsu class, there was a lady who saw me like working on my WordPress site, and she's like, oh, is this what you do? And she's like, I'm like, yeah, this is what I'm learning. This is something I want to try getting into. And she's like, oh, I work for this marketing agency. We'd love to, like, if you want to get an internship, we could do that. So because I knew her, she kind of saw what I was doing. It led to an internship. That internship basically led into a contract role, and I worked there for a while. My next company was this company called VersaSuite, where they made medical projects. How did I get that job? It wasn't blindly sending my resume. It's by having a friend of mine whose wife worked there. And I kind of said, hey, if you don't mind, can you pass my resume and give me a referral? And she's like, yeah, I'll do it. And so every job I had, the Red Hawk research job, it's some guy I met in jiu-jitsu who needed a React developer. This is actually a funny story. So I met this guy, referrals from friends. That's basically the main takeaway, and connections. But I just want to put the power of referrals and not giving up. This, I promise, this is the last story I tell. So I do jiu-jitsu. I have a friend in the classroom. He owns his own company. A very smart guy. And he knows I do WordPress stuff. And he's like, Paul, like, I know you do WordPress stuff, but I don't need a WordPress developer. But I just want to ask, just in case, do you know somebody who does React? Because this is back then when React was like super hot. And I was like, yeah, I have a friend, Jeff. He's an amazing React developer. So I connected David and Jeff together. And David and Jeff worked on this huge project for like 4 years. And then one day, Jeff calls me out of the blue. He's like, hey, remember your friend David? I'm like, yeah. They're hiring more React developers. And he's like, I was going to refer you to the company because you've been learning React for past 4 years. And so I actually ended up getting a job working at Red Hawk Research. And the way I got there is I recommended a friend to my friend first because I was underqualified. And then over time, my friend's like, hey, you now know what you're doing. Let me recommend. So the power of social networking is really good. And I think where a lot of people get frustrated, I know I keep saying the last thing, but this last thing, is that when they try to get a job by blindly sending resumes, what they're not realizing, you're competing with internal referrals. So I've heard people that got laid off where they got referred to a different team on the same company internally. I also had friends who got laid off because they have other friends who are developers. They ask them for referrals. And so if you're just sending resumes only, you're never going to beat the pile of folks being referred by friends. And that's an unfortunate truth, but I think that's something that, at least if you're trying to break into the industry, you need to network more than sending out resumes blindly, because that'll be like my number one takeaway. You gotta network, you gotta get out in the community for sure. You gotta be part of the club.
That's a good point. What would you, I know that we're already a bit over, but I think that's a really interesting point. What would you say to someone that simply doesn't have the privilege of being able to relocate to a city that has more opportunities? Like, there are a lot of people out there that aren't even in the US, and even some that are in the US, they might not be able to relocate to a bigger metropole. Do you have any practical tips for those people in terms of how they can network? Maybe they even don't want to move, they want a remote job. What do you think about that? Because I also think that because everyone wants a remote job, that also exposes an opportunity for those that are willing to get in-person jobs. And frankly, for those that are just starting out on their careers, that might be a great opportunity, right? It's a great timing if you're willing to to do that. So how do you see this?
Oh yeah. So I mean, I moved to Austin, Texas because this was pre-pandemic, and I think after pandemic things changed that actually made things different in terms of getting a remote job. So the reason I moved to Austin initially is because the concept of remote work was like nobody was thinking. It was like a privilege that like mid or senior developers had because they worked for certain companies, and that's the privilege you had. But after the pandemic, it was actually the norm to work remotely. And so I think with that, it did change the world to where finding remote opportunities is more abundant than when I was looking for jobs, but it's still very difficult. And all the things that I mentioned about networking applies. But the one thing that I would say, a lot of times when people apply for remote positions, like, and when I use the example of this girl friend that I have who sent 700 resumes, like you have to put a massive volume when searching for jobs. There's just no way around it, or referrals, like because sometimes what happens, you think you did enough work in terms of like looking for a job, and then you're like, no one's returning my calls, no one's like getting back to me, and you give up. No, you just got to keep doing until people get back to you. Like it's just the process that you do until you get the job. That's what people have to understand. But with that being said, yeah, there's definitely more opportunities now. When looking for remote though, I feel like it is very competitive. And sometimes if you're not able to find a remote job, like finding a, brick and mortar job, that's, that might be like your thing to do. One caveat to that I was going to say is that a lot of times when people apply, they apply to all the companies that like all the other people apply to. And they think of like, big corporations, like IBM, Microsoft, like big companies. And it is very competitive because a lot of times they're trying to find like the top talent. I took the opposite route when I was first trying to get a job. I was literally applying to software companies that nobody knows exist. Like nobody knew what's Red Hat Research? Nobody knows, but they need a developer. Versus Suite, the worst company I ever worked for, they need a developer. You know what I mean? It's like, so there's a lot of like small companies that building software that might have like a 10-person team who need a developer, and they will hire you. But if you're not applying to those companies, you'll never know. Like so for me, like I don't want to play where all the big boys play. Like I'm not going to apply to Facebook. I'm going to apply to places, especially when you're starting out, where the big players are not competing. You know what I mean? And some people like, for some reason, find that be like a taboo thing. And for me, it's like there's a supermarket store in Texas called HEB. I would have never thought of applying there as a developer, but they actually are very well known for their like software engineering team. And in Austin, they have like this tech hub building just for developers. And I would have never guessed that HEB, a grocery store company, needs developers. And that's what people need to do. They need to don't go where everybody else goes. Just because like the company is small doesn't mean that they're not going to pay you like a good salary to work there as a developer. So apply everywhere, especially when you're starting out.
Makes a ton of sense. Great advice, man. Okay, so we are at almost an hour. I think we can start wrapping up. And let's just do some quick promos. Chris, why don't you start?
I have a totally dev unrelated promo. Tomorrow is the quarterfinals for the Euro, and the first game, which is I guess noon Eastern time, Germany versus Spain. Even if you don't like soccer or whatever, football if you call it, I would check out this game. I think for me it's the final, but yeah, soccer fever has me captured here.
What are the other teams that they're, because this is the quarterfinal, right? So there's also another pair of countries that is going to play against this winner. So
there's France and Portugal, I think, is the other game. Then you've got England, Switzerland,
Turkey,
and Netherlands, Turkey, which sadly beat Austria. That was sad for.
Yeah, no, but Germany and Spain that's gonna be strong. Yeah. Okay. High hopes. I will watch that. What about you, Peter?
Yeah, funny enough, I would say I'm with Chris on this one as well. I'm kind of looking forward to the game as well too. I think that's probably my open one as well. Yeah, it's really an awesome game, and I really want to. I think that's the final, as he said. That's probably the final because whoever wins is like, yeah.
Okay. All right. I like when those things happen and then it's like a completely unexpected winner at the end. You're thinking that, oh, it's going to be either Germany and Spain, and then after that everything's already in position for them to, and then like Portugal wins everything. I don't know. I remember in the last World Cup, Brazil was playing against a country which I don't know how to say that in English, but in Portuguese it was Camarões, and they weren't known to be very strong in soccer, but they won that game. It was right in the first group, and it didn't disqualify Brazil because Brazil still won other games, so they were fine. But it caught everyone by surprise. It was like, holy shit! Like, what if that wasn't like the first group game? We would have been disqualified. That's so. Yeah, it's soccer has. I think all sports have that luck playing around, and it always makes you want to watch the game because you never really know what's gonna happen. Yeah. What about you, Paul?
I mean, since we've been talking about Strapi, I would just say if you need a headless CMS solution, I check out strapi.io website and go from there. And I'm at Strapi, so Monday through Friday on their Discord channel, we have open office hours at 12:30 p.m. CST. So if you want to hear me chat about nonsense, definitely stop on by. Otherwise, I want to say huge thank you to all for having me here.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the time. On my end, I'm just going to pick the two companies that produce this show. So we have Top End Devs that produces a lot of other podcasts as well, of other tech subjects. So if you're interested in checking out maybe Angular or just regular web development with JavaScript, there are shows specifically for that. And also, if you are a company or just someone that wants to build a project or wants to extend their team, maybe you work in a company that is looking to extend their staff and they're having trouble hiring good talent, then definitely check out Unvoid. Is unvoid.com. They are basically they offer the same they solve the same problems that a regular software development agency would solve, but they solve it in a way that is much more client friendly. So instead of the clients paying by the hour and then tasks taking longer than expected and the client having to pay for that, they only charge after the tasks are delivered and approved. So that gives predictability on cost and quality to the clients. So if you know someone that needs that, definitely check out their website and reach out, and they probably have something that is going to solve your situation. So yeah, that's going to be it for me. Thanks everyone. And Paul, it was a pleasure to meet you. Please reach out if you ever want to come to the show again. And yeah, man, just thank you for your time.
No, thank you, Lucas. And it was a pleasure meeting you, Chris and Peter. And yeah, I mean, I think you don't know what you did by extending that invite. I think I'll take you up on it probably more often than you would like. I'm just kidding. Because as you could tell, I love to talk too much probably, but that's okay. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
No worries. Definitely take me up on it. All right. Thank you for sticking up until the end of the show, and I will see you in the next one.